Hi everybody, just to say, go and grab a drink, have an explore of the exhibition. We'll be starting officially at 7 o'clock, so do have a look around, explore the exhibition, and we'll get started in a little bit. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Try that. Still working. James, if something screeching starts, please press this button. Testing. Testing.
Worked, I think. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew McMillan. I'm Professor of Contemporary Writing here at the Manchester Writing School at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm so thrilled that you've all been able to join us here this evening, both in the room and to people watching us online as well on the live stream. This event is being live streamed for a few people online. Don't worry if you sat in the audience, it will only get the back of some of our heads, and the event isn't then being recorded for posterity, it's simply a live recording. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping first, we're not expecting a fire, so if the fire alarm does sound, please grab your favourite poetry book from the stack and run out from the nearest exit, which is just kind of out there and to the left. The toilets are also just out there and to the right. It is very warm this evening, obviously, and certainly in this room as well. So you do have water and drinks to the back should you require anything. If this is your first time in the Poetry Library, do spend some time having a look around. We've got an exhibition about state violence on the black female body that's currently being displayed here, that's being curated by Malika Booker, a colleague here in the Manchester Writing School. And do have a look towards the back. There are leaflets to sign up for the Poetry Library and to check out the kind of future events that are happening over the coming weeks as well. Roy McFarlane's coming, Isabel Gallimore, Hannah Copley, lots of different events that are coming up. Kim Hai-soon as well, coming to read for us in the Poetry Library. So do check out those events as well. But enough about the future and back to tonight. So I'm so thrilled and honoured that we've got Tishani Doshi here with us this evening. Tishani's been here with us all week as part of the international poetry residency that we have here in the Manchester Writing School, in the Manchester Poetry Library. And Tishani follows on from really great people. Gloria Chichoncho, who came over a few years ago, Dante Michoud, director of Cave Canem, who was here with us 3 years ago, and last year Joss Charles was here from America. And the residency, as we're going to hear about tonight, is really something organic, something that grows and is moulded by the poet who we invite over to spend time with us. And so it doesn't come with a set of instructions, it doesn't come with a set of outputs. It's simply for us to open this magnificent space of the library and to invite, in this case, Tishani in and to ask her to what she would like to do. And this evening's event is going to be a testament and kind of evidence, really, I guess, of what that's been. And what Tishani said to me when we chatted about the residency was that she really wanted to kind of get a feel of the city in a personal way, in not the kind of formal tour way, not going and sitting on the open top tour bus and kind of going around Manchester, but could we get a real feel of it? And so some of our brilliant MFA and PhD students, alongside some colleagues, Andrew Malik and Malika Booker again, took Tishani around some of the sites of Manchester, and then Tishani's also been kind of exploring herself, and we're going to hear from some of those students this evening, as well as obviously from Tishani. The residency also, I guess, is a fairly selfish thing, because it means that I just get to invite poets who I really love and admire and spend time in their company as well. And I think we've all got those poets and those poems that lodge themselves in our brain, that we repeat back to ourselves, that we overhear ourselves saying as we walk about the empty house at night. And a poem that many of us in the audience who know Tishani's work will be familiar with, The Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, has this astonishing line in it: what does it mean to give somebody a proper resting? And it's this line, this phrase that I just hear myself thinking about saying so often. And so it's been remarkable to kind of have Tishani here and to expand this thinking of a residency and what the library could be. The way tonight's going to work is we're going to hear from Tishani in just a moment, who's going to read for us a little bit, and then we're going to chat between each other about the experience of the residency, about some of the ideas that have maybe been forming, and in between those chats I'm going to invite some of those students who helped to welcome Tishani and show Tishani the city, and we're going to sort of hear readings from those poets as well. So as I say, we're going to start off with a reading from Tishani, and please just join me in welcoming the fantastic Tishani Doshi.
Hi everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. It's really, really lovely to be here. Thank you, Andrew, for that wonderful and generous introduction. Um, in my spare time, I guess I'm a kind of fortune teller because I got to choose my week to come to Manchester, and I chose this one. So I think I did pretty well weather-wise. And in general, I find that places open up to you in different times of your life, in different seasons, when you arrived there, when you left. And so I think I will always remember Manchester now as the sunniest of places, which might not match with other people's descriptions. And I think the reason why I wanted to be shown around the city or to have other people take me is partially because I have a very bad sense of direction. I get lost all the time, and I would be going around in circles. But also, I think cities open up to you through intimacy if you know someone there. And when you are a stranger and when you're walking around, that's one experience. But then, even if you know just one person who takes you to the place that means something to them, that sort of is more memorable and stays with you somehow more than sort of the other things that you do, which any tourist can do. So I was very intent on doing this exercise, which was very enjoyable. This thing keeps sliding down. Okay. Thank you, Anita. So I thought I'm just going to read. So the idea of place has been very important. We've been talking a lot about place and Manchester as a place, and I'm coming in as a complete outsider. And my place is a city of Madras in South India, where I was born, where I spent most of my life. Um, and the city that I feel somehow that I also have to defend a lot and that I have to amp up because people think it's boring or conservative or whatever. So I have a lot of poems about Madras. But as I said, place is also connected to do with season. And so today I want to start with a poem that's really about how, when I think of my place, it is almost always during this season, and it is the monsoon. So this is not to bring on rain in the middle of your sun, but yeah, monsoon poem. Because this is a monsoon poem, expect to find the words jasmine, palmyra, kurundohai, red, mangoes in reference to trees or breasts, paddy fields, peacocks, kurunji flowers, flutes, lotus buds guarding love's furtive roots. Expect to hear a lot about erotic consummation inferred by laburnum gyrations and bamboo syncopations. Listen to the racket of wide-mouthed frogs and bent-legged prawns going about their business of mating while rain falls and falls on tiled roofs and verandas, courtyards, pagodas. Because such a big part of you seeks to understand this kind of rain, so unlike your cold rain, austere rain, get me the hell out of here rain, rain that can't fathom how to liberate camphor from the vaults of the earth. Let me tell you how little is written of mud, how it sneaks up like a sleek-gilled vandal to catch hold of your ankles, or about the restorative properties of mosquito blood. So much of monsoon is to do with being overcome, not from longing, as you might think, but from the sky's steady bludgeoning, until every leaf on every unremembered tree gleams in the abyss of post-coital bliss. Come, now sip on your masala tea, put your lips to the sweet, spicy skin of it. There's more to see. Notice the dogs who've been fucking on the beach, locked in embrace like an elongated Anubis, the crabs scavenging the flesh of a dopey-eyed ponyfish, the entire delirious coast with its filter of beach and saturnine clouds arched backwards in disbelief, and the mayflies who swarm in November with all their ephemeral grandeur to die in millions at the behest of light, the geckos stationed on living room walls, cramming fistfuls of wings in their maws. Notice how hardly anyone mentions the word death, even though the fridge leaks and the sheets have been damp for weeks. And in this helter-skelter multitude of gray-greenness, notice how even the rain begins to feel fatigued. The roads and sewers have nowhere to go, and like old-fashioned pursuers, they wander and spill their babbling hearts to electrical poles and creatures with ears. And what happens later, you might ask, after we've moved to a place of shelter, when the cracks in the earth have reappeared? We dream of wet, of course, of being submerged in millet stalks, of webbed toes and stalled clocks and eels in the mouth of a heron. We forget how unforgivably those old poems led us to believe that men were mountains, that the beautiful could never remain heartbroken, that when the rains arrive, we should be delighted to be taken in drowning, in devotion. Yeah, the rain has different connotations in India. It's a welcome, it's the time of growth and life and abundance and romance, not running away to warm your toes. And I read another small little Madras poem before I sit back down. And this is very different in nature. It's more to do with the childhood memory. When I was young, I was part of the Gymkhana Club swimming gala. This was like a bunch of 12, 13-year-old girls where we would swim, my sister included, and we would have this sort of hat with a candle on our heads and have to do synchronized swimming in the swimming pool. And the poem is revisiting a kind of memory, I guess. And it's called The Comeback of Speedos. And it's one of my shape poems. I have a lot of shape poems in God at the Door. And it's obviously in the shape of a pair of Speedos. And therefore, it's a very small poem. Written in Italy, I have to say, where the Speedos never went out of style. But anyway, The Comeback of Speedos. I'll keep this brief. I remember the shock of Mr. G's tiger-striped trunks at the Madras Gymkhana Club. Nothing to conceal, everything to declare, like a Mills and Boone hero. Shiver, ball and sack, acres of hairy scrub. We could not imagine such freedom for ourselves, to slice through chlorinated depths with a little basket of dim sum on display. We were girls. To open our legs was treason. We held our breath.
Thank you so much, Tishani, for those fantastic poems. And I wanted to start off by, I guess, just picking up on that idea of place, because as we were saying, one of the first things that we talked about when we were planning this was that desire you had to get out and see people's kind of real city, as it were, like beyond the official tour, that what is people's kind of personal connection. And I was just wondering about, for you, as you enter a new place, as you're inhabiting a new place. Why is it that that feels so important to do? And is that partly, I think, particularly in that first poem you read us, partly the role of poetry as well? Is it poetry that helps to find that personal insight to a city?
Mm. I think part of the reason is that I'm a person who is terribly homesick. And yet, when I'm home, I get irritated with being home. And so there's always this weird push pull. Um, my second book was called Everything Begins Elsewhere. And that elsewhereness has not left me. And it's like a sickness. And I try to contain it because I feel like I'm here, I want to be here, I don't want to be here and then dreaming of this other city. I just want to be here fully, you know. But I think it also comes when you leave home. Once you leave the circle of home and you've gone across the seas or to the next village or wherever, you you've experienced what it means to be outside. And that's an interesting position to be in, but it's also lonely sometimes. It's vulnerable. Um, it's freeing. You can be whoever you want. You can be a different person. So there's many things that come with it, and I'm just really interested in what happens in that displacement. And I love to be in new places. I love that feeling of disorientation that new places allow. But I think it's also about finding a kind of foothold. And so when we were talking, this was just a spontaneous thing that what I remember most about all of my travels are when somebody who's from that place, who's very connected to it, who has memories to it, has taken me to their favorite place for coffee or their favorite restaurant or taken them to see their grandmother, which happened to me when I was in Trinidad. And she said, "You're from Madras. My grandmother's people came from Madras." And I was like, I'm up for seeing anybody's grandma any day. Let's go, And I think those tend to stay in my memory very strongly. And I feel in a way there's something a little magpie-ish about it because I'm basically piggybacking off somebody's memories to say, take me with you to your part of the city because I'm only here for a week. What can I do in a week? I can walk around, I can start talking to people, strangers at a pub, sure, eavesdrop. There's a lot you can do, but I felt like this way it's a direct thing. So Anjum, for instance, took me to Rusham and she took me to Sanam, this restaurant that she went to from the 60s with her family, and they would come up from Birmingham and they've been going there for years. And, the guy was talking about the owner and the owner's sons, and it's this whole, the doors open up, and you get taken in with it. And so for me, in a way, it's a very heady experience of finding your own place within someone else's context. And that allows you to, it allows for me, Manchester, to open up in a way. And it can have millions of possibilities. If I had time, we would be here, there, everywhere. So I think I was just really interested then in what can happen from those encounters. And then you're right. How does language build that gap? What comes out of it? So before I came here, I was looking at this painting of a dodo by Mansoor, who was one of the painters of Jahangir. And he painted it from a real life dodo. And so I started this sonnet to the dodo before I traveled here. And then when I traveled here, there was the news of India and Pakistan possibly going to war. And then I went to the Manchester Museum and I saw this foot of the dodo. And so now I have a poem titled Sonnet to the Dodo, written while jet-lagged in Manchester as India and Pakistan, potentially go to war. And it's this bringing together a clash of places. The dodo that is extinct, that lived for a very long time, but within less than 100 years was wiped off the face of the planet. Two countries that have been artificially divided in the first place that are now fighting and possibly, people getting killed and the border and all of this fraughtness. And then that weird feeling of being jet-lagged where you don't know where you are for a while. You're waking up in the strange hours, you're still dragging some dust from the place that you just left, and then you have this new light. And all of that feeling is very, very powerful and potent to me. And it's all about time and what we carry. And, I think it's an endless subject for me as a poet.
I mean, that sounds like an astonishing poem as well, that I'm very excited to read when it's finished. But I wonder, I mean, there's always the danger, I guess, of thinking about like the exceptionalism of the poem. But I guess as someone who's written, you've written novels, you obviously kind of work in dance as well, and kind of work with the physical form in movement. Thinking about that astonishing array of topics that you just gave us, so the kind of dodo, the jet lag, the idea of travel, the kind of international crisis of potential war, is there something about the poem that is suited to holding all that, then also that obviously that fits within the form of the sonnet more than it would for you in another form of artistic expression? Does that, I guess, the array of stuff, that magpie quality that you mentioned, is there something that suits the poem in that sense, that is suited to the poem?
I think in the sense, what I'm finding at least is that poetry has an elasticity that allows me to absorb these multiple ideas and to kind of bring it into focus. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a sonnet. It's a form, but the sonnet is putting an even greater structure on it, but in a way that a short story or fiction feels too vast, too difficult, too time-consuming. Again, I want to be able to hold it now, so I'm holding it now for this week. I've been tinkering, and then I will be done with the poem, I hope. Some poems get abandoned, of course, and they don't get finished, and they haunt you, or they're just sort of lying in a drawer until the time is right. But I think, yeah, for me, it's also challenging to see how you can quite force yourself to distill all these ideas into a very small form. The Speedo poem, it started off so many things, and then I found the form, and then that made the poem. It unlocked it. So I don't know what I was trying to say. I think in terms of when we begin writing poems, we rarely know what we are doing. It's a lot of grappling towards, moving towards, thinking, oh, I have a poem, How to Be Happy in 101 Days, and I thought it was going to be a poem about happiness. And the end of the poem, I was like, shit, I've written a really unhappy poem. How did that happen? Why did I wanted to write a happy poem. I was commissioned to write a happy poem. And then it kind of just swerved, it moved, and it was still thinking about the idea of what do we think of as happiness. But then the poem has its own subterranean chambers, and it just will reveal itself. And I love that about writing poetry, that you can't really know where you're going, and the only way to do it is to write it through. And sometimes, you might have all the intentions that I'm going to write about this, that, the other, and you will be thwarted. So you have to go with a little bit of looseness, and figure it out.
Thank you. So I want to come back to the Speedo poem in a little bit as well. But first of all, I want to, as we were saying, Tishani was shown Manchester, the kind of real Manchester, by several of our staff members, but also MFA and PhD students. And some of those are here tonight to kind of share in the event and to read their own work, which really speaks to some of these subjects and speaks to what Tishani was saying. So I'm going to invite, when I invite one of them up, they'll introduce themselves and just read a little bit of work, and then we'll go back into the conversation. So Sumi, can I invite you up first of all, just to introduce yourself and read us some work? Give her a round of applause as she comes up.
on poetry. I'm from Sri Lanka, Jaffna in particular. And I have three poems that deal more or less with place. First is called uh, Petrico, and I did not know you were going to read about monsoon, but I selected that. I smell the pouring rain, throw my head back and breathe it in. It is wet and heavy, the smell of rich black earth. It is the smell of happy mischief, dancing under the hanging roots of the Indian rubber tree, my little pink umbrella cast away. It is the smell of staying home from school, sipping sweet tea on the veranda, hens huddled in cane chairs, all watching the rainwater crawl up the front steps. It is the smell of power cuts, leaving homework half done, hunting for charger lights, their batteries are dead, then lighting lamps and hurried cooking in the half dark. It is the smell of family chatter, funny happenings of the day, and that's how we lived when we were your age, of making up stories about the flickering shadows. It is the smell of adjusting mosquito nets, huddling in bed in the rare coldness blown in by the monsoon, covering my ears at every lightning. A decade and 5,000 miles away, I step outside with my eyes closed and breathe in the smell of my tropical island childhood. The next is Manchester and Jaffna. You can guess which is which. A Roman city, a cotton mill industry, music, bands, nightclubs, gangs, gays, illegal, legal, academics, homeless, Ferraris, stagecoaches, skyscrapers, underground bunkers. I needed to come to Manchester to understand what Jaffna means, to see my home with new eyes. I realize now that the sunsets I saw every day walking along the Pannai Bridge were magnificent and rare. The stars I gazed at, standing on the causeway in the middle of the sea, will vanish in a metro city. I no longer see the common egret, swans have replaced them. The salty air and hot spices must be made or imagined. In bed in the dark, I dream of the sea's whisper and my father's voice. The third is Finding Home in Manchester. I have come here for the first time, but it feels like home. Like my childhood tantrums and treasures were always leading me here. The happiness I promised myself, clenching a tear-stained handkerchief in an empty schoolyard, are etched in the Mancunian sky. I know I am a stranger here, but I call everyone friend because I am home. I have come to a mirror and found it is a door. I have looked into my face and seen it smile with delight at finally meeting me. I walk these streets, I walk these new streets, but somehow my footprints have preceded me here. Each day feels like I've lived it before. Each new voice is familiar. My life flows like a new river, knowing its path, its destiny. Rocks and boulders are swept away, and fears can only hold me if I let them. They too have learnt my strength. As I walk, little pebbles leap up to embrace me. The sun's last rays are caught in my hair. The moon plays peekaboo, gliding between skyscrapers. Somehow, this place was always meant for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumi. We'll hear more readings interspersed through the rest of the event. Tishani, I kind of threatened to come back to the Speedos, but I think more I was thinking about kind of one of the great things I've always admired about your work in terms of what the poems are able to contain. And we thought about this idea of arriving in a place and what you want to see, and Anjum taking you to this certain restaurant, and we know that because she took my credit card, so I was able to see the receipt. But also, you know, these kind of that image of the dodo from Manchester Museum and things like that. And one of the great kind of qualities of your work, which is such a kind of rare quality in poetry, is how to use humour, is kind of these ways in, unexpected ways into something that then, as with that second poem that you read us earlier, open up into these incredibly profound meditations on much larger, maybe more serious kind of subjects. And I just wonder, this may be an impossible thing to talk about, but just what it is that kind of draws you to certain things as you enter a new place, or as you're beginning to kind of conceive of that new poem, of the dodo, and then the kind of international kind of conflict, and then kind of place or jet lag or whatever it is. What is it about these certain things that other poets might go, oh no, you couldn't, that's not for a poem, I couldn't write about that? How is it that you're drawn to these things but then able to mine them for those kind of profundities that are underneath them?
Thank you. I think I'm interested in a certain complexity, but not just for the sake of something being complex. I think that the way that our brains work, all the synapses, the connections, which we can't know about. So this undercurrent, the underconsciousness, all of that, that dream state, that jet lag, all of this state brings out something, you know. And I like juxtapositions, and I think poetry does that well, you know. You can do that in a poem. You can. I have a poem in this book, which is to Pliny the Elder. And I think I read some article about what he thought about menstruation or something. And then I wrote a poem, Advice to Pliny the Elder, Big Daddy of Mansplainers. And it's in the shape of a menstrual cup. And, you know, again, it takes a tone. It's funny. But then it goes into a kind of seriousness. And it talks about desire and the body and what actually does it mean for female body. I'm thinking about my own aging body that is moving out of that phase of the monthly bleeding and all of this stuff. And you think, can you write a poem about this? I don't know, but I'd like to try, you know, and I think the thing is, I like the leaps that poems can make, that you can go from one image to this other image. And I remember when I was writing that poem, there were these dogs that were in this distant field keeping me up by barking all night long. And so, of course, the dogs come in and the bees that were in the hedges. And so the natural world, what is outside, somehow comes into whatever the internal impetus is for writing the poem. Why one does that, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the mystery of where does the poem begin and why. But I like putting together unlikely things. And again, it's not just saying, oh, let me just pick this and this, and you know, but it's more that you actually start to see resonances or feel them between certain subjects. And I think it's also to do with the different journeys. I didn't say that when I got here, the first thing I did on Sunday was I took a train to Chester because my mother is from North Wales and I have family there. And when I went there, I met real relatives and I hadn't been there for 11 years. And the one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to find my grandparents' grave in the church. And I was looking around, you know, and I couldn't find, and I finally, one of the sort of relatives took me, and then while I was looking for them, I saw the names of two other people who had died in the meantime, you know, and it was this, they said, did you find them? And I said, yes, I met everybody, you know, and there was this thing of place again. I have so many poems about Wales, which I've never spent time in, but it's my mother's place. She grew up there. You know, I have a poem where I meet her in the playground where I spent, and she's a girl and I'm a girl, and we play together. And you can do that in a poem. I think you can time travel, you can bend, so why not? It's free, you know. It's available. You don't need special effects or anything. You just need language. And I think there's also a way then to contain that word that you brought, the immensity maybe of some of those feelings, which, you know, I guess I'm thinking a lot about ancestry, I'm thinking a lot about geological time, about the present time, what are we living through now, what does it mean to be alive? It's crazy times, you know, all of that. And then you think about simple things like love, desire, those things that keep us going, connection, you know. So I think that, and then, yeah, I think humor's always, it's about register. Because if you're always on one register, it's like music. You can't just keep hitting that one note, you know. To have the variety, you have to be able to move. So you can have the high register of language, but then you can also throw some colloquial, you know, it can contain all of those things. And I like that leaping and bounding between those things as well.
And time's really interesting, I think. So I think, again, back to that initial conversation we were having as we were sort of planning this residency, but then actually conversations we were having just earlier today when we were sort of saying, oh, how's it been this week? And we've not had a massive amount of structure. You went out on Tuesday, as we said, but also just time to hopefully absorb the city and spend time with it, kind of travel to different places as you were just describing there. And actually, I guess there's something about a place maybe that can't be known in the immediacy, that actually, you know, one of the things we might talk about tomorrow with this residency is what comes after it, like what writing might emerge from it in the coming months or when that sonnet's finished and things like that, I guess it's almost impossible to arrive here if we demanded 10 new poems by Friday or kind of something like that. But actually just part of being in a space in a residency like this, it feels to me, is just having time.
Yes, and I think you can't plan. For me, it was very important, the idea of the collective. I've really been interested in how poets have worked in the past as, you know, a kind of collective. And in fact, today I've been talking about these Tamil poets from 2,000 years ago who shared a landscape, who shared this whole vocabulary, symbology of landscape, and they worked from that. And then so much so that the individual voice is not so important, but just that the voice reaches, you know. And so I'm loving to share stage with these wonderful poets who took me and hung out with me and shared stories, and we ate food together, and we were talking about what does it mean to share food, to gather around food. It's so many connotations. It's like people are starving, we are having food. You know, did you have picnics growing up? Did you not? You couldn't, you know, all this stuff. It brings in politics, it brings in war, it brings in, again, tenderness. I think like in any Asian culture, or I think a lot of cultures, the way to say I love you is, have you eaten? Right? It's like, you can't say it out loud, but have you eaten? It's this tender, have you eaten? If you've not, can I feed you? Can I, you know? So food is important, and I think like in a way this also came out. And I couldn't have planned, it just happened because Anjum took us to get kebabs, and you know, and then it went on. So.
Very expensive kebabs. No, they were fine. But speaking of that collective, we should hear from another one of these voices. So, Abhijit, if you'd like to come to the stage, give them a round of applause as they come to the stage.
Very timely. Timely because Tishani just talked about how in many languages and in many cultures, you know, way of saying I love you is have you eaten? And so I think I was going to start with something, but I think I'll go in reverse order. I'm Abhijit, and I'm an MFA student here at Manchester Met, and I'm always very grateful whenever I'm standing here at the Poetry Library, because in my friends it is known that this is my second home, and I'm always found here. So yeah, so can we just clap for Poetry Library for always hosting us? Right, so this poem is called When. When. I opened the door, but it was really, I hear you. I opened the door, but it was really, I hear you. When was the last time we had a conversation between within and without? How long it took for me to ask, do I hear you? Do I hear you in the when? In the last time we had, when we had a tea, did we? Thank you. This poem is called Little Touches of Solitude. This title comes from Roland Barthes, the French philosopher. It's from his book Camera Lucida. It's first page, and he talks about how there are these instances of just moments in fleeting and passing, when you have these little touches of solitude, which you experience in silence, and you cannot, like when I was walking here, I had a little jerk in my knee, probably because I was sitting for a while, and so this is, I'm here with all of you people, but it's something which I share in silence with myself, and I wrote this poem in the northeast of India, in a state called Meghalaya, which literally means home of the clouds. And I did not plan on the rain part as well. Um, and this was written in the capital of that state, Meghalaya, which is called Shillong, particularly Upper Shillong, which is, well, it's all mountains, but more mountains. And this was written in a tiny village in Shillong called Milliam. This is called Little Touches of Solitude upon reading Barthes in Upper Shillong. It happens to be a private conversation between things and their time. Sometimes my leg reaches for the pencil and I hit one of the legs of my table and I think aloud, a fuck. Listening to the winds curling up midnight on the hills of Milliam, I'm whispering my pleasures to clothes. Shivers are joys too. They let me enter the prayer room. I in my bed whistling to silence. These are the points of existing in the history of a moment, and we are separated by love only in flesh. There is bread waiting for water, and these innocent hands to break fast. Breakfast. First thing, my shadow has hurried unto the gentle yellows of tomorrow, under the young mothers of light, fine threads of sun, retrospection, and balm appear on my forehead. Thinking is company too. Rubbing my toes on the calves, I listen to the day scratching my back. Things I cannot need enough, want enough. Things having a moment between me and my time. Thank you. And this last poem is a sestina. Oh. A sestina, this is very brave of me to be reading sestina in front of such brilliant poets. Just because I'll read this and I'll finish, just so I can say this. It's really an honor and a privilege that I'm sharing stage with Tishani Doshi, because I did a master's in literature before coming here for my second master's, and we read her poems on our syllabus as part of our reading list for contemporary Indian poetry in English. And Tishani Doshi is, I mean, she's sitting here, so it feels, you know, um, there is a I don't know if I should say it, but I will. There's a not a proverb, idiom in my language. They say "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar," which means house's hen is same as the lentils. But it's not really like that, because Tishani, for me at least, and for many poets like me and who are starting, who are emerging, and my generation has not only been an inspiration, but she's a tradition through which we all come. It's really an honor, Tishani. This last poem is obviously for Manchester. Sestina. Sestina is a poem with 6 stanzas of 6 lines and a final triplet. All stanzas having the same 6 words at the line ends in 6 different sequences. So this poem is titled Field Notes as a Sestina from a Mancunian Nightlife. And the 6 words that will repeat are void, roses, nonchalant, conundrum, tin, and bruise. This. A Christian gesture towards your bruise, or I flatten my hands really into love's void. A merciless faith, this junior cult rain fogging the roses, swaying on my summer window. Whether a nonchalant crush, me a thread for a stitch, proper niche, plated in tin, clinking through the night of the Mancunian conundrum. Of low waist jeans, medieval corsets in NQ, the Moor conundrum on your northern plains. Blonde damps her bruise with coral reefs, necklacing her tender and nonchalant. Voyeur clause is active, street a glass eye, booing a void. Homeless clutter Piccadilly, all grass is to them is tin, puzzling them pockets. Victoria's bust are dead roses. The brunette sculls her man, he is shining her tan roses and biting the thorn. It takes 2 to bruise an empty bus stop. They kiss each other null and void, a map of red. Later they part into a hymnal so Latin tempus fugiet. City is a polis, lisp and conundrum make the most of us an easy prey and too nonchalant for sleeping. I keep rhymes nonchalant because rhymes are thieves stealing night's purse. Void, what will I take from the pauses we bite roses with? I eat you in smelly corners, leaving you blue rouge for weeks. In bed, I'm creek walks and Sunday conundrum in my kink for you, ringing crickets under a tin abandonment. All the ruins, newsflash us, silver and tin, and money is clawing your skin. That Jupiter bruise under your eye last night where you came is void. I never heard from you after our conundrum sessions through quantum truths. I'm conscious I can't build a house replaying modernist poses. I despise Picasso's roses. I have stopped going to the cathedral, pay in roses my debt to an old grief. Transaction is abusing my bruise. I'm turning myself in your subtle hands. The cold tin accidentally reaches you from trash. The kitchen void, dump lag. You forgot to tag me in pictures from nonchalant April of last 2024. I enter a cosmic gag, pushing conundrum down my throat, swallowing fizzy bruises from soda tin. I empathize with tiny voids, roses, drying by the mercy. All my conundrums are nonchalant and by and by. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Abhijit. And Tishani, I guess I was thinking about, I mentioned before, you're a writer who's been celebrated in many different forms. We've been thinking about poetry this evening, but previously she's celebrated for award listed for novels, kind of obviously very well known and famous for the work you've done with choreography, with the body, with dance. And this might be a little bit of a strange, and we were talking about non-fiction as well when you first arrived, and kind of maybe ventures into that, and how actually these forms ebb and flow sometimes within us, that sometimes they feel more accessible to us and sometimes more closed off. this might be a bit of a daft question, but I was wondering what that relationship is, I guess, between place and form. That do certain places suggest poetry more than, or do some places suggest movement and kind of dance and choreography with the body, or do some more suggest prose in some way? And just for you, what that relationship, if there is any at all, is for you between the kind of form of something and the place that you might be in or thinking about as you write it.
I don't know, I think for me the sort of part of the whole aspiration of writing and dancing or making is also to escape place and to be in this third space, which is of your imagination and making. Obviously, writing a novel is much more involved, and it requires you to kind of go into that space and hold it for a very, very long time. And there's something wonderfully intense to the point at which wherever you are kind of recedes, and the thing that you're making has to take a kind of precedence, otherwise it will never be finished. Poems are less intense that way. They're obsessive. When you're writing it, you can't wait to get back to it, but you're still able to be more aware of where you are. But in general, I think there are places that I find resonate with me, and that bring out a kind of response, and it is evoked, it is brought out. And then there are places that don't. And I think it's very personal. It's very much to do with, how you react. And I think, a decision I made as when I was younger was to move back to India after having studied in the States. I worked in London for a bit, and there was just something saying, go home. Just go home and figure it out. And it was a very good thing to follow that instinct, because that's where I learned how to become a writer. I became a dancer, I became a writer. I thought, okay, this is what it means to choose this thing in life. And, maybe I could have figured it out anywhere, but I knew that somehow being in that environment, that I wanted to write out of that, was important. And it still continues to be important today. So if I'm away from India for a very long time, I start to feel like I'm losing my form. I start to feel my legs are here, my hands are there. I'm thinner. I lose, I don't know. I don't have my center. Then I go home and I center, and then I feel strong, and then I can go back into the world again. So I think some places are replenishing like that. They have that quality of being able to give that. And other places are either just nothing or the opposite. They drain you. And so I think I'm interested in place in that sense, but always it's to do with, why are you in a place? Are you a voyeur? Are you a tourist? Are you doing something there actively? Have you been able to relate to it in some way? Every place has magic. Can you find it? And some places it's more obvious, it's more available. And other places, like I said, it has to. And I always feel like I have to do that for Madras, because people are, including my husband, complaining about having dragged him to live in the most boring city in India. And I'm like, no, it's not. And this sort of thing that is a push-pull. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. But I've always thought, and even with the body, which is such a big part of my practice, I think, and I write a lot about gender, and that is also form, right? And I think that the most beautiful moments for me are when I'm writing and when I'm dancing, where I can just escape the body and gender altogether. I can be this amoeba. I can just be floating, one-celled creature. And that to me is the state, a desired state, even though I'm writing about all these things, but it's sort of like an emancipation from self. It's like a being outside oneself for a while, and then going back, you know. So I think that freedom that art making allows is also freedom from your own self and your own body to inhabit or to just be floating outside of, even if you don't actually inhabit another thing. It's just a being above. And it's really, it's not like you're always like that. A lot of the times you're not feeling that. But that occasional rising up, it's so wonderful. And that's what we kind of aspire to, you know?
Thank you so much. And we're just going to move on now to our final kind of reading. So please welcome Anita to the stage.
Hi, thank you to Tishani and Andrew for inviting me to share this space with my fellow poet colleagues. My name is Anita, Anita I. I'm also an MFA poetry student here. My family is originally from Hong Kong, but you might be able, woo, that's a rare one. You might be able to hear from the way I speak my English. I've spent some time in North America, so I grew up in Canada and spent quite a bit of time in the US as well. So when Tishani invited us to choose poems to read today about places, I was like, oh, that should be relatively okay, given I have lived in different places. So I try to look for poems in things I've written, and very naturally, I picked one that has to do with food as well. And actually, just a comment, Tishani, earlier in the evening, you mentioned how sometimes you're in one place and your mind is kind of longing for another place. I think this is one of those poems where that happened. And sorry, just one more note. In case you're wondering why in the poem, sounds like I'm obsessed with a certain object called a tape measure. I used to be an engineer in a previous life, so that's why. Sunday dinner. Tonight, as we did our weekly dinner, I tried again to gauge the distance between my heart and my mother's. I took out a tape measure and discovered it was not enough. I saw shadows on the hook of the tape measure, cantilevered above the round Chinese dining table, hovering between us. They danced like goblins, consuming the boiling hot peanut chicken feet soup, performing an offering to denial, a tug of war on words, and of course emotions, a bowl full of it. I've been looking forward to the chicken feet soup, thinking of the old saying, eat the body part to remedy that body part. That's because I had just returned from traveling again. 6,465 miles northeast and back, another 1,216 miles due north, 1,973 miles west, across oceans and datelines. I had tracked through the Silk Road and the deserts of Karakum and the lives of our forebears. I took a tape measure with me. I always have it with me. In fact, I wrapped it around rhythmically around the planet as I went around her, like Chinese dancers with their silk ribbons. So it was a mystery to me, a lifelong enigma, that this tape measure of mine would be enough to travel the vast skies, seas, and lands, but not long enough to find the distance between our hearts. So instead, at tonight's dinner table, I focused on counting the grains of rice bestowed upon us, an obligation, a tradition I've learned to respect. Oh, and my mother, she was content to play with the remains of the chicken feet, joints taken apart after we had sucked off their skin and cartilage, thus forever jumbling together the bones of these roosters, hens, chicks, before they move on to their next lives. You could probably tell from that poem that I'm a big traveler. And this next poem is one of those places I would like to travel in, but probably more as one of those kind of really just plain sightseeing. You go hit the sights and then you leave kind of a place. So, Google Map to the underworld. If I were a developer, one project I would work on is building the Google map for the underworld. I would similarly get volunteers to start filming everything. Every intersection, every turn, from Earth to the Yellow Springs to the shady mansion, every corner around the mirror platform and the fire pit. Every nook in the 10 courts where corruption, greed, disrespect, and even gossip cut across and pile up. Everything, all of it, all 18 levels of hell. And if the app gets a lot of downloads, I might have money to hire professional help. Just to catch the hidden dead ends in purgatory, all the spots under the eyes of the guardians of hell, of King Yang Luang, where no one dares stroll through. And perhaps one of those images would capture you. Accidentally, face clear, unblurred. Certainly, privacy would not be a concern by then in this afterlife. And before I finish with my last poem, just want to apologize for a poem that I'm not going to read, that I have not written. Because actually, Sumi and Avijit have both presented poems that is to do with Manchester. And I looked and looked and looked, and I realized I've not written much about Manchester yet. In fact, this last poem I'm going to write, in a sense, is almost like catching up with life. It's about my father's life, but he passed away 4 years ago. So I feel like, wow, it takes 4 years for me to finally actually get to writing about something that's probably been sitting in the back of my mind. But so perhaps 4 years after I leave Manchester one day, then I'll start writing about the city. So sorry for not talking about Manchester. A summer swim. Whether the 18-year-old could make it was definitely a question open for debate. Stick skinny from thin rice porridge and the occasional northern whiting when he had the energy to fish. A crooked left middle finger, once caught in a rice transplanter that no one from the production brigade had come to show the village how to use. What to expect from an old Russian machine. The party did care for him. Why else would the village cadre teach him how to read, and in turn let him teach at the primary school? So it was strange that he left behind the little red book. He hitched 4 rides to get to Shenzhen Bay. Typical summer days, wind still, water calm, and he waited and waited by the shore. And finally, the day arrived. A typhoon on its way to southern China. Nothing to prepare, he had no belongings. He had already memorized the Hong Kong address of his uncle's friend. So when it got dark enough, he dived into the bay. The water that would lead him to the rest of his life. Milk tea, fish and chips, machines to sew for the world, and money and wives and children, including me. Then losing them, but that's later. For those 4 hours, he belonged to Mazu, the sea goddess and the empress of heaven. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita, and to all our student readers from our MFA and PhD program here at Manchester Metropolitan University. We're going to finish momentarily with a final reading from Tishani, but just to say again, thank you all so much for being here this evening, for hearing about what's been happening this week with this international residency. Do sign up to the Poetry Library if you're not already a member, and do look out for other events, as I say, that are coming up through the summer. If you want to hear more from Tishani, she's going to be on BBC Radio 4's The Verb this Sunday. She's had the kind of terror of having to be interviewed by 2 different members of the McMillan family in the same day. She was in Salford earlier today. But that'll be on this Sunday, so do look out for that. But we'll finish, as I say, just now by hearing from Tishani again, but just please join me one more time in thanking the sublime Tishani Doshi.
Thank you. I'll just do a quick little ending because I think we've had some lovely poems. This is not cooperating. something I was thinking about, which is also to do with place, is music. How certain songs can take you back to a certain time in your life, and especially, I also feel now that I've stopped listening to new music. I just keep listening to the same songs again and again. I feel like that's it. I'm stuck in this time, and I will never be in the now because I don't know any new music. So anyway, this poem. So there's a film that I've seen about 35 times, and it's Dirty Dancing, and this is a poem about that, where I, after a long break, sort of put in the soundtrack in the CD player, uh, and I was suddenly brought back to being a teenager and being in love with Patrick Swayze and feeling this incredible love for this person who, you know, was just like there somewhere on the other side of the planet, and then equally grieving uh, for that person when they died. And it was this strange thing. I wonder, I don't know, is it like something to do with the hormone of being a young teenage girl, or could I still feel that intensity? I don't know. For those of you who don't, or who have not seen Dirty Dancing 35 times, I'm sorry, but maybe you won't catch all the references. Anyway, it's called Ode to Patrick Swayze. At 14, I wanted to devour you, the twang, the strut, the perfect proletarian butt in the black pants of you. I wanted a man like you to sashay into town and teach me how to be an aeroplane in water. I didn't want to be a baby. I wanted to be your baby. I wanted revenge. I wanted to sue my breasts for not living up to potential. I wanted Jennifer Grey to meet with an unfortunate end and not have a love affair with a ghost. So see, you don't know the movie Ghost, so it was very few people. Okay, all right. I'm just gauging the room on your Patrick Swayze knowledge. Okay. At 14, I believed you'd given birth to the word preternatural. And when mother came home one day, waving her walking shoe, saying, I lost my soul in the Theosophical Society, I wanted to dance as recklessly as the underside of that shoe. I wanted to be a pebble in the soft heel of you, to horse whisper and live on a ranch in Texas and love my blonde wife forever and have creases around my eyes and experience at least one goddamn summer where I could be like the wind, sexy and untrammeled and dirty. And it was only after I found my own Johnny and got rid of him. Only yesterday, when I rescued a northern shoveler from crows on the beach, his broken wing squished against the crockery of my ribs. Only after setting him down at the edge of a canal where he sank into the long, patient task of dying, that I realized what I'd wanted most was to be held by someone determined to save me, someone against whom I could press my unflourishing chest, who would offer me not just the time of my life, but who tear out reams of his yellowing pancreas and say, here, baby, eat. I'll end there.
Can lift now. Go and eat all that cake at the back of the room. Because I also paid for it on my credit card. No, I don't.